The question we're going to look at now is question B for Boyle's law. And question B says, what pressure in ATM is required to compress 1.00 liters of gas at 760 millimeters mercury pressure to a volume of 50.0 milliliters? Question B is a little bit more challenging than question A. There's going to be a little bit more unit conversions that you need to do and a little bit more focus on understanding what is the question asking and who's your first, your P1, V1, and who's your after, P2, V2. So remember, you can always refer to this as P1, V1 equals P2, V2. If you see a 1, that can mean initial. If you see a 1, you can also think of it as who was first or what happened before. Whenever you see a 2, you can think of it as your final. Or when you see a 2, you can think of it what happened second or what happened after. It doesn't really matter which term you prefer. They all mean the same thing. P1, V1 is what happened first. P2, V2 is what happened after. It's always your initial versus your final. So for question B, you're looking for the pressure in ATM. You're looking for the pressure because it says what pressure. So what pressure in ATM is required to compress? So to compress means to make smaller. 100.0 liters of gas at 760 millimeters mercury pressure to a volume of 50.0 milliliters. Notice the first thing I do is I underline what all my variables are by finding my values and their units. So I know I'm looking for pressure because it says what pressure in ATM. So I'm going to go ahead and just identify that I need to search for P. At the moment, I don't know if it's P1 or P2. I can take care of that as my last step. So what pressure in ATM is required to compress 1.00 liters, that's a volume, of gas at 760 millimeters mercury pressure, that's pressure, to a volume of 50.0 milliliters. That's again a volume. So if you know that the volume units are going to bother you, then make yourself a note that you remember your volume units are going to always be either liters or milliliters. It would be very rare to see another volume unit. The only one that might come across is the unit of centimeter cubed. So if you look at your formula sheet, on your formula sheet, there's the unit of 1,000 milliliters equals 1 liter. Those are going to be your two most common units of volume. So make a note for yourself on your formula sheet, just as I did. And then it would be helpful for you to go ahead and come back and write down that 1,000 milliliters equals 1 liter. So again, I want to remind you, your most common units for volume is going to be liters and milliliters. I just brought back up centimeter cubed because we had used it before in the past, especially first semester, but it's not on your formula sheet for the quiz or the test. So if that bothers you just seeing it there, you can get rid of it because it's not going to come up for you on a quiz or a test. So let's go back to our question and figure out who's what unit. Is the P the P1 or is it P2? So now you have to go back and reread the question. What pressure in ATM is required to compress? So what pressure do I need to make this volume of gas at this pressure, right? Look at your context cues. This volume of gas at this pressure to a, so that means now this is going to be my after, to a volume of 50.0 milliliters. So what pressure am I going to need to take this 1.00 liter of gas that's at 760 millimeters mercury to make it a volume of 50.0 milliliters? So this right here is my V1 and this is my P1, because the question is telling you that you started with this volume at this pressure and you are now wanting it to go to this volume. So this is your V2, and that means that you're looking at what pressure did you need for that. So what pressure is the 50.0 milliliters? What pressure of gas is that going to be in? Let's say none of what I just said makes any sense to you. So here's another way that you can look at it. You can look at what was your larger volume and what was your smaller volume. And I'm picking on volume for this question because it's the only one that you have two of. You have P1, but you also have an unknown P, right? So if you look at your two volumes, it tells you 1.00 liters and it tells you 50.0 milliliters. These are two different units, so let's make them the same unit. We know that every 1,000 milliliters is equal to 1 liter. So if I have 1.00 liters, that means that I have 1,000 milliliters. So now this right here is bigger and this right here is smaller. I can't go from smaller to bigger if I'm going to compress it. To compress it means to make smaller, so you're squeezing it in. So that means I started with a bigger volume. This must be my V1, which I had already confirmed. So I went from a bigger volume to a smaller volume because I wanted to compress the gas. So this right here is my V2, which I had already confirmed. I went from the bigger gas to the smaller gas. Okay. One last thing that you're going to need to focus on for this question is you're going to have to focus on converting units. Notice that we're dealing with liters to milliliters. There's going to have to be a unit conversion there. And notice that we're going from millimeters mercury to ATM. There's going to have to be another unit conversion there. So this is going to be a pretty intense formula in terms of how much unit conversions you're going to